Thanks. Well, I guess I'll get straight into it. So I'm Catherine Flick. I'm a reader in computing and social responsibility, which basically means I do technology ethics. That's kind of my bread and butter. I've been doing it since, I guess my PhD was published in 2009. So I've been doing it for well over a decade. Obviously, spend some time on doing a PhD before it's finished. So yeah, probably about 15 years or so now. My specific area of interest at the moment are emerging technologies and responsible innovation, and I'll be talking a little bit about both of those things throughout this talk. Now, I was invited to give a talk about the why, what, and how of a code of ethics, primarily because I was invited by the ACM, which the Association of Computing Machinery, which you may have heard of, to help them update their code of ethics. This is in 2018 or 2017, 2018. And now I'll get on to, kind of why we were doing this a little bit, but this is basically what this talk is going to be about. I was invited because of this work that I've been doing on emerging technologies. I was also invited because they didn't have any non-Americans on the team. So it was a very American-centric group of people who are trying to create a code of ethics that should be a little bit more worldwide, global in its reach. And while we had quite an extended team, and we also had many consultations, quite a participative event really for the entirety of the ACM. We had over 4,000 people respond to a survey, for example, from ACM members, to a qualitative survey, and I had to do all of the qualitative analysis for that. I was kind of the key non-American perspective when it came to actually putting together the final bits of the code. So, like I said, we updated the code in 2018. The previous version was from 1992. Now, I don't know if you were maybe even born, some of you perhaps, by 1992, but it's a little bit different now in the space that we're talking about in terms of what the computing profession is, what sorts of things it encompasses. I mean, the internet wasn't a widespread thing in 1992. There was a lot of stuff that we do now that hadn't even really been thought of. Surprisingly, actually, if you go back to the 92 code of ethics, it's surprisingly, it still stands up for the most part, although security is talked about mainly in terms of physical security, which is an interesting kind of little, quirk of the time. Now, some of you might be ACM members, and I think it's really important that you understand what it is that you've signed up to if you're an ACM member. So, if you've signed up as an ACM member, which I don't really care if you're an ACM member or not, but if you are an ACM member, you should care about the code. It is one of the things that defines you as a computing professional. You can fall back to it. I'll talk about things about how to, what sort of teeth it has at the end. But it is really something that you can lean on, you can look to, and you can get guidance in your professional day-to-day life through the examples that we have, the case studies, and you can talk to ethicists within the ACM. We have a whole group of us that are really available for questions and things to talk about in terms of the ACM code. So also, there's probably another few reasons why we should probably be talking about codes of ethics. And that's really, why is it relevant? I mean, we've had codes of ethics for a really long time. It's only really been the last 5 or so years that big companies are starting to actually think about ethics, because they've realized just what a complete monster they've unleashed into the world. And they've suddenly realized, we need to kind of start reining this stuff in, right? And I mean, I'm not going to go into the specifics of whether they're doing a good job or not. That's kind of outside the scope of this talk, but the big people, the big companies are working on it. Maybe you should be as well. There are loads of issues that even, researchers haven't kind of sorted out yet, let alone implementations into the community and into society. There are lots of ethical questions that are still unsolved or unmitigated within implementation land, I suppose you could call it. The Financial Times, which is a fairly conservative bellwether of industry stuff, suggests that you can't ignore it. And I would probably think that, I guess given my job, I would suggest that you probably shouldn't ignore it either. But really, that there's an emphasis on making sure that you are not just creating things, but you're creating things that are actually contribute to society because it could cost you in the end. I mean, I love the fact that the FT looks about the potential negative impact as being costly as opposed to potential positive impact, which could be good for society, but that's another talk as well. And then finally, Raconteur, which is a business decision-making magazine, talks about how it's really important to balance ethics and innovation during tech transformation, and the fact that, you know, if you're moving on in different ways and you're creating new innovation chains, you need to make sure it's not just regulation that you're looking at, not just the law, but you need to look at the potential social impact. Basically, the public is wising up. You get a lot more ethical consumerism. That, you know, people are skeptical about new technologies, and, you know, it's time. If you're not already doing it, although you're at this talk, so you probably are, you're doing the right thing. Okay, if you're doing this sort of stuff. So I think it's important to think about, you know, one of the key aspects that we changed in the Code of Ethics was the focus of it. So originally in the original code, it was all about professionalism and what it was to be a good professional. And it was all about following the rules and following laws and, you know, really very, very rigid rule bound kind of stuff. You know, thou shalt not this, you know. The new code is very much about being an aspiration. It's about raising questions and not just about answering them. Like this is not a place to come to find answers. It's a place to come to find ways of thinking through potential issues that could come up with the technologies that you're developing. And this is one of the key aspects of this code of ethics is this opening statement, which I'll just read, and it's verbatim. Computing professionals' actions change the world. To act responsibly, they should reflect upon the wider impacts of their work, consistently supporting the public good. The ACM Code of Ethics and Professional Conduct expresses the conscience of the profession. And then the very first principle is that a computing professional should contribute to society and to human well-being, acknowledging that all people are stakeholders in computing. And this is so important because of the fact that we really want everything, if you ever have problems with resolving issues, or you have conflicting values that you need to resolve, the key focus, the paramount principle is the public good. So, you know, if you're struggling with how to you know, resolve issues, come back to this public good issue. And one of the things that we have in this particular principle is you know, it also includes wider stakeholders, if you might want to call them. So even the environment, so environmental sustainability is included here. We have significant amounts of there's a real focus on diversity and diverse voices, social responsibility that's come out of the kind of corporate social responsibility movements and things like that, and accessibility are all part of this, you know, focus on the public good. And there's a really good phrase within the Code of Ethics where you say, where interests of multiple groups conflict, the needs of the less advantaged should be given increased attention and priority. So it shouldn't be about the bottom line so much as what is it that is good for the most, you know, marginalized people that are going to be affected by this technology. And this is still where a lot of big companies are having their problems, right? So I think in some ways that one of the ways that I think really code captures the sort of zeitgeist of the time is in the changes and the additions that we created. I mean, you're probably not at all familiar with the Code of Ethics, and I'm not assuming that you are at all. But I think it's what I want to pull out are a couple of the main things that we changed, and and to have a little bit of an explanation of why we changed it and what they add to a code of ethics for computing professionals. So our most controversial new addition, well, actually it was a bit of a change, a lot of it got kind of mangled along the way, but it's a new thing really, was 1.4, which is be fair and take action not to discriminate. And the reason why this was less well accepted by a very loud but tiny minority of ACM members and the general public was because of their concerns about social justice warrior, diversity, you know, stuff like that. Like they were worried, they were just really angry that we were worried about diversity. Now, technology has had diversity issues for a significantly long time, ever since it really started. It is highly discriminatory still, even though we've been trying to work on this for so long. I mean, this was the most, like, we had such, this really was the most loudly like just angry minority one. I mean, we just didn't take any. We didn't. Well, we paid attention to it, and then we dismissed it because this is about progress, and we can't have technology that's mired in, you know, the issues that we know exist in terms of discrimination and lack of diversity in technology. And I'll get onto that a little bit as well about the diversity side of things. So 1.5 was also a big change. That's one of the ones that I'm most proud of because it used to be respect copyright, the end. And as you know, since 1992, the discussion has come along a long way in terms of how do we deal with crediting work. And I mean, we've had lots of like open source movements have come up. We've got, you know, Creative Commons spaces. We've got all kinds of collaborative methods of working now. And there's sort of an increased understanding about things like fair use and what should be available to the public. So this was all used to be all about respecting. I mean, it's much more nuanced these days. And so now we really try to recognize other ways that credit work and the places where the public good takes precedence over legal requirements. So there is a clause in there that says basically, if you think this is in the public interest, then you should be aware that there could be legal proceedings taken against you, but ethically, you're in the right to do things. 2.9 was really this sort of security by design was what we wanted captured here. And back in the previous code, it was all about physical security. Like literally, it was like locked doors and things like that. You know, store data, you know, in locked filing cabinets. These days, obviously, things have changed slightly. And really, we now know that security not only has to be good in terms of its security, but it needs to be usable. And there's a really good quote from the code itself that says, in cases where, and we talk a bit about misuse as well. So it's not just about about things being like that are secure, but they need to be robust, they need to be updated, there needs to be protection against misuse, and you have a responsibility to do that as the technology designer, implementer, that sort of person. We have a particular thing about misuse here. In case where misuse or harm are predictable or unavoidable, the best option may be to not implement it. And that's something very new within this code is we say, look, if you can't deal with it, if you can't deal with the security ramifications or if it's going to harm people, just don't do it. This is the classic kind of, you know, the scientists like the Jurassic Park quote, right? Malcolm saying, you know, just because you can do it doesn't mean you should, right? So that's what we wanted to capture there. 3.6 is use care when modifying or retiring systems, and we really wanted to capture here. This is a brand new one. This is one that we wanted to deal with things like the Windows effect. We wanted to deal with things like Google, who tend to retire stuff without really thinking necessarily about the knock-on effects of that. I guess, you know, the Windows 7 debate was the big one that we really wanted to kind of deal with here, and it requires if you're going to be retiring things, you need to migrate users very carefully, and you need to provide viable alternatives to removing support for legacy systems. So that's one of the key things that we've added in there. And then finally, the one that I think is also really, really important, especially in the age of social media, is this 3.7, which is recognize and take special care of systems that become integrated into the infrastructure of society. And really, I mean, these systems that now, like the Googles and Facebooks and Apples and of the world, the Amazons, they have so much say over how we live our lives. They have so much say over who gets to talk to who gets included in an app store. We wanted to capture the significantly deeper ethical requirements that they have to society when they're put in charge of that much control. And, you know, with great power comes great responsibility, right? This is kind of what we're trying to capture here. So I think it's important, you know, like I've gone through a couple of the little changes and some of the things that we've done, and hopefully that's whetted your appetite to go and read the whole code and get really excited about applying it, right? So how do you actually do that, right? And one of the things that I really want to re-emphasize is that the code is not a set of answers. It's a set of methods that you can use to really think through what it is that you're doing. And one of the things as an ethicist, I often get called to comment on stuff when it's too late. I'll be shown, I'll be asked, I'll be called up, or an email, I'll get an email in my inbox that says, I have this great startup, we've got all this money, we're going, we've got our MVP ready to go. Can you give us some ethics guidance? I'll be like, you should have called me, a year ago, right? Because ethics is not something, I mean, you can do some mitigation stuff, but if you're wanting to build an ethical product, it needs to be built in from the beginning, right? And so this reflection aspect that you need to do, even on the sort of the very early ideas, is really important. And I'll give you a framework at the very end that can kind of factor the code into it that helps you go through the whole innovation life cycle. But the code really should be getting you to ask questions and honest, and which you should be thinking of very honestly. Like, you can't, it's very nice, to get the blinkers on and think, yeah, my technology is going to solve this problem in the world. And it's very easy to get quite blinkered on the problem solving and forget about the fact that it might have potential harm or cause, problems for people who maybe aren't the key end users that you're thinking of. It really needs to be considered thoroughly. It needs to be considered honestly, and you really need to think about it, how it's going to be. What's the sort of, not the sorts of answers that are very specific to your technology that you're developing. We can't give you that in a code of ethics. You have to come up with that yourself, but we give you a guide on how to get there. So I'm going to give you a couple of scenarios where, maybe you might want to think about stuff, these sorts of issues. I'm just going to see how much time I've got left so I can make sure. Yeah, that's good. So let's say you're building some tech for vulnerable people. And I've got an example here of video games for children, and some of the issues with the in-app purchases. It's a bit of an old screenshot, but I think it really illustrates some of the issues that I'm concerned about here. So obviously children are vulnerable. They maybe shouldn't be buying stuff through mobile phones potentially without their parents' permission. So, if you're a video game developer aiming at children, there should be some, you need to be really heavily thinking about what your monetization practices are, right? So some of what you might do when you're thinking, oh yes, I want to build something for children, let's go through the code. So what I want to just reinforce here that, you need to be looking at this holistically. I'm going to be picking out a few bits and pieces I think are specifically important and that you should definitely focus on, that I think are important, but you may find other things important, and there are definitely a lot of important stuff in there. These are just some of the things that you can think of. So, so principle 1.2 is simple. It's avoid harm. Don't harm children, especially vulnerable people, right? I really hope that this should be fairly self-explanatory. I mean, we're very keen to say within the avoid harm that if there is some potential for harm and you're not sure if it will happen or not, try to mitigate it as much as possible. If it does occur, then you need to try to undo it if you can. Undo the harm, redress it. This is particularly for emergent properties. So if you've got, machine learning applications, for example, that work with vulnerable people, there may be some potential, the good may be really, really good, but you need to just keep an eye out for potentials for harm and then undo them or mitigate them where you can. 1.3 is specifically about being honest and trustworthy. If you're working with vulnerable people, you may need to change the level at which you're communicating about what it is that your technology does. So, an app for children, if you want to have their consent, it needs to be, written about in a very different way from an app for scientific data analysts or something like that, right? So there's different sort of language levels. You need to be upfront with all of the potentials for harm, the potentials for the capabilities, the limitations, and the potential problems that could occur as a result of using your technology. In 2.7, we want you to foster public awareness and understanding of computing, related technologies, and their consequences. And this is about education. It's really about getting into helping, kids, other vulnerable people, go and, do maybe allow your employees to go and do some volunteer work at a local code club, or, an old people's home, getting them, helping them, use Skype or something like that. Like these sorts of, working with the people that you're likely to be targeting, you're going to have much more empathy and much more ability to, make stuff for them if you can understand their perspectives. And so doing things like, fostering public awareness is one way to do that. And then finally, one of the particular things that you should really focus on potentially is obviously security. If you're dealing with children, let's say, like I have baby monitors, I don't want internet-enabled ones personally because their security tends to be pretty rubbish because they don't get updated, for example. There are lots of issues that you can have, particularly for vulnerable people, if security updates, and that vulnerable people tend to be bad at doing security updates as well. So there's a lot of issues that you need to really think about when you're working with vulnerable people. Okay. Data analytics, machine learning. This is an old, and we still have this problem, right? So Tabot was 5 years ago and we still have these problems, okay? People still release stuff that does this. It's just incredible. I shouldn't have to give you too many examples of this, but this was a very early good example. It should be, self-explanatory. So this is my little code of ethics booklet, which if you're an ACM member, in 2018 you would have got in the mail. I'm just going to read out, these ones are all fairly self-explanatory. Don't discriminate, right? Respect privacy, have high quality stuff, this is also, I'm just going to get angry about number 2.5, right? So in 2.5, we talk about give comprehensive and thorough evaluations of computer systems, their impacts, including analysis of possible risks. And I really want to read this particular one. Extraordinary care should be taken to identify and mitigate potential risks in machine learning systems. A system for which future risks cannot be reliably predicted requires frequent reassessment of risk as the system evolves in use, or it should not be deployed. If you can't monitor, if you're just going to let something go in the wild and just forget about it, the computer learns itself, that's not good enough anymore. You need to be monitoring it. You need to be ready to pull the plug if it starts doing this sort of stuff, okay? And I cannot emphasize, I'm getting really mad about this, but I cannot emphasize this enough. It is just not good enough anymore. So that's my rant over. And once again, if you run into conflicting values, the public good needs to be your central concern, not your puzzle that you've solved, not the amazing piece of technology. Yeah, it's probably a great puzzle. It's a great solution to a technical problem. Maybe it doesn't need to be in society though. Okay. So that's my little rant about machine learning. I have many talks on this. Diversity stuff. These should hopefully be fairly self-explanatory as well. I've only got a couple of minutes left. So, this is the Microsoft gender and ethnicity breakdown for 2019 and 20. It's still not great. It's better than it was in 2018 when I first had a screenshot about this. But it's still not great, and we need to fix that. And there are things in the code that really emphasizes the importance of doing that and how you can potentially go about it as well, and potential issues. All right, so FAQs. So this is, what if my boss thinks codes of ethics are for losers? Well, for basically, you can do what a lot of companies have been doing, employees and companies have been doing together, band together with other ACM members, push back, say my professional code of ethics doesn't let me do this. And this is one of the benefits, I guess, of being an ACM member, although I'm not shilling for the ACM. We've seen this in Google used the ACM code of ethics to push back against Project Dragonfly. There have been other companies where the employees have banded together and pushed back using the code of ethics. It's been used in legal situations as well, et cetera, et cetera. So this is one way you can do that. What if I'm in the military or security? So particularly this security people get upset about the avoid harm because sometimes it's important to harm in order to do a better, for a greater good. We have, we developed the code with that in mind. There are some very specific case studies that we have that talk through how to use the code if you're in this sort of situation. But the idea is that harm should be avoided and minimized. And that's, I guess, the key thing, really. How is this code different from others? It is up to date, I guess, is one of the things. It has had massive participation from lots of different computing professionals from all different backgrounds, et cetera, et cetera. And so it's had a huge amount of input that we've had to go through and take into account when we've developed the We call it the conscience of the profession because we honestly think that we have captured that through this participatory process. And what if I break the code? Well, there's a whole PDF that explains the enforcement policy. Really what it can, the ultimate thing is that the ACM can only really police within the ACM. And we can do, the worst thing that we can do is potentially kick someone out of the ACM. Now, if you're in some areas, that is better than, well, it's worse than in other areas, because some of the big conferences and journals are, ACM conferences and ACM journals. But obviously, if you don't care about that, then it's probably not such a bad punishment, but it is, it is as much as we can do without further regulatory, apparatus from governments, etc. Now, just very quickly, my final slide, really. Responsible innovation, which is the thing that which is kind of it's an umbrella term that encompasses ethics. This is a way of thinking through your innovation life cycle to create technology with and for society. And you can, one of the ways that we have this sort of framework called the AREA framework, which is about anticipating the potential impact of your technology. So you can do this through various different methods. I'll give you a link at the end. Reflect on the ethical and social issues that your tech may raise, and you can use the code of ethics for this. And that's one of the key aspects of this framework. Then you need to engage with relevant stakeholders to help identify potential issues and mitigate them. And that just helps bring in diverse perspectives, which allows you to identify some potential issues quicker than if you put it out in the wild and then everybody gets mad at you. And then finally acting by putting methods in place to ensure that issues are resolved, that your people get good at training, et cetera, et cetera. And there's a whole bunch of, that's more an infrastructural issue. So this responsible innovation framework can help you frame the whole innovation life cycle of your technology. And I really encourage you to have a look at it. There are some benefits. This didn't come out very well. Anyway, there are some benefits doing it. I'm sure I probably already told you all those, but really if you want to look at more of this stuff, there's the ACM Code of Ethics here. If you want to look at the case studies, they are available at ethics.acm.org. Also, the Code of Ethics is there as well. I do a podcast on video games and ethics, which is not updated very often these days. But this one here, the other orbit, which the other orbit is orbitrri.org. They have a whole load of interesting information about how to implement responsible innovation, and they do training for researchers if you're a research organization, that sort of thing. And then here's where you find me. Thank you very much. I'm really excited to answer any questions.